Yesterday was Thursday, June 11th, and I sat down with a couple of teachers in the high school and had that uncomfortable talk about race. It's a really important conversation to have. We talk about the events that have transpired since the situation involving George Floyd, and we talk about a bunch of other things, a lot of corollaries that branch off from that incident. So sit down, take the hour, listen, process, analyze. Hopefully, you learn something new. Hopefully, you walk away a better person.
Hi, I'm Stephen Sklar. I'm here with a bunch of different teachers in the high school. We're here to talk about really the only topic of conversation that anyone's really been able to focus on the last couple of days. If you haven't heard about what's going on, I really don't know how you've been avoiding it. And this is one of those uncomfortable conversations that no one wants to have, but it's one that we need to have because it's the only way we're going to be able to progress as human beings, as a society, as a nation. Obviously, this is all in relation to the incident involving George Floyd. So I'm going to open this up. It's going to be a little bit broad to start, and then we're going to peel back the onion layers. But I want to know your initial reactions to the videos and what was going through your head when you first saw what was going on. I'm going to start in the top left corner of my screen with Mr. Manning. Yeah, like I said, what was your initial reaction to the video? What did you think was going on? What was your headspace at that moment?
Well, first, it's good to see you, Steve.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
Great to see you guys. Not the right situation, but I'm happy to see you guys.
Yeah, it's always good to get together and talk about these things. I think my first reaction was I was just horrified, to see that play out on camera. Then a range of emotions kind of played out. I tend to see things through a historical lens because of the nature of my job. And right away, my head was spinning with the historical context of we've seen this before. The nation has gone through this before. Are we ever going to make progress? A little bit of fear. I have law enforcement in my family, and I know the backlash that was going to come after that. So immediately made some phone calls to the family, and my brother was equally as outraged and kind of went through the same range of emotions because, he has to go to work every day. And I think like many, and then watching it play out, it was tough. It was tough to watch. Someone lost a life, and we watched that play out on camera. And to see the reaction of the world does feel different. I often reflect on the fact that I've seen this play out through the history books and through the movies and documentaries. And now to watch this happen, I wish I was in the school building to talk to the kids and use it as a teachable moment. But for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm living through this moment in the world that really is going to change the world. So it's a range of emotions. Find myself really reflecting on it, but that was my initial thought process.
I'll move down the list, Mr. Howley. Yeah, I think Mr. Manning said it perfectly. This is something that we have seen in the past. This isn't a new topic for us. This isn't something that we haven't addressed before, but we still see it happening. Mr. Howley, again, what are your thoughts on what was going on? The video when you first saw it, and how did you feel when you saw that?
Sadly, it was I don't want to say a numbness because I wasn't surprised. I wasn't shocked.
You weren't surprised. Explain that a little bit more.
It's a lot of times you get sort of, I don't want to say I'm desensitized because I feel every time something like this happens, it bothers me. But, it became the point with the school shootings, it just would be a matter of time before you'd hear this happen. And then it became like a matter of time before it would happen again. And I was still, in my mind, I guess I was still kind of thinking about and I cannot remember the name, the runner who was killed. And
Ahmaud Arbery.
Thank you. Like killed for running while being black, and so that was, it's so there's like sort of a numbness that sets in. The best case like thing that I can equate it to in Hotel Rwanda. Don Cheadle's character talks to the guy, the news guy, says, you got to show this to people back in these homes. And like, what happens is like people in their homes, like they'll see it and then they'll help. He's like, I think people are going to see it and they're like, oh, that's a shame. And then they move on. And that hasn't happened this time. So I get hopeful that there's going to be a moment of change, but I've felt that we've been on the moment of change to go back to the school shootings, like the Sandy Hook shooting, like, well, finally something's going to happen. And that was years ago. Like those kids are graduating high school or would have graduated high school. And the Las Vegas shooting, I thought that was me the one for change. When I was younger, Rodney King happened. 1992. It's like, well, things are going to change, right? Because we saw this. So now things have to change. Like you have the evidence, and so it'll change. But it doesn't change because Eric Garner and the Ferguson, like it's there, and it's you keep thinking, oh, well, finally it's going to change. Maybe we are here. I like at that doorstep, and I hope so. But like, so that's where, like I said, like I'm upset. But like it's like sometimes you keep draining more and more out of the pool. You wonder how much more you can drain out, But maybe if we've emptied it and we've hit bottom, so that we can do something different. And that's my hope, in this situation.
Well, yeah, it seems like we enter this cycle. One of these incidents happen, and then there are protests, and then there are riots, and it's all over the news, and everyone's up in arms about what's going on, and everyone seems I don't want to say like they pretend to care, but they make it seem like they care, and then it dies out. 2 weeks go by, and you don't hear about it anymore. Coach Blount, would you agree with what Mr. Howley was saying? Would you say that we've sort of emptied the tank and this is going to be a turning point in the talks that we had about police brutality and race relations? Do you feel that things are going to change more than we've seen them change after other instances in the past?
I would hope so. It seems as if you'll see if you're seeing certain states and certain cities, already making, swift changes. I think as as cities are making some of those swift changes, I think you need to look at, some of the changes that they are making, especially with police reform. You can't do things too hastily, which may be a detriment for us moving forward. So I think they need to really look at those things that are rushing into judgment. I think that that there's going to be a lot of change, mainly due to the unrest and how upset many people are, in America overall. So I do think there's going to be some changes. We're already seeing a lot of changes, and I think this reaction to this situation is something that has stemmed, something that has grown over time. And I think there does need to be some changes, but we also need to keep in mind that there are some fundamental things that we need in society. We need strong police, we need strong government, and we need those people are important into keeping the safety in our communities.
Right. Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of change going on. We've seen there are police departments that are losing a lot of their funding. We saw that. The aggressors in the George Floyd situation, their bail was doubled. I think Derek Chauvin's bail was doubled from 50,000 to 100,000. Maybe I have the numbers off, but I know it was exponentially increased, and he's going to have a hard time getting out. Perfect, right? He doesn't deserve to leave his cell anytime soon. Mr. Turk, this is something that should have been going on during school time. Obviously, we've been out of school because of, the health situations that coronavirus has posed for congregating in large indoor spaces. And it's something that none of us really got to experience in this large group in school, how the teachers would have dealt with it, how the administrators would have dealt with, this situation specifically. We're going to talk about other situations that have hit the district in a little bit. How do you feel like this would have panned out in school, throughout the school district, if we had been together?
Well, one, thank you for having me here today. But two, I can only say what we would have kind of tried to attempt at the high school level. Teachers, as much as the administrators, are supportive here in the building, and they would try to help us out and do what we ask. But teachers are the ones who work with the kids. And so, the biggest, hardest, toughest thing is that we need, as a building, we would have loved the opportunity to actually talk and listen. listen to the right kind of students that we have, not just listen to, any kid who's just coming in discussing, what they feel, but being able to listen to the different types of students that we have, whether they are a minority student, whether they are not a minority student, and then being able to listen to all of our students and all of our teachers and find out a way to create meaningful dialogue that actually creates change. One of the things these protests have really kind of caught me off guard is there's a giant hole where empathy should be. And that's in our society as a whole. And I would have loved to be a part of a staff, which I know the staff does it, but I would have loved to show the students just how much that we can teach kids. You're going to use language and you're going to, talk about these things in political ways, but you got to be able to look somebody in the face and not insult them, not, criticize them, not belittle them. And you want to be able to take care of every human being that's next to you and around you within earshot. And we missed out on that opportunity because we're not together. And we missed out on that opportunity on how to break this down so that people can really begin to learn from what is happening.
And I think that the best way to, like I said at the beginning, progress as a nation, progress as a society is through not necessarily here's the thing. 80% of this call right now is white. Coach Blount, he's one of the only of color teachers in the school. And we don't really have that perspective in the high school. We have a very homogenous perspective going on through the high school. And it's very hard for us to empathize with what's going on. I'm going to come back to you with this question, Mr. Turk. So we've seen the reaction in plenty of cities, in Minneapolis and Los Angeles, in New York. We've seen the peaceful protests going on, and we've seen those protests escalate to their violent stages. Do you think that those violent stages of protest are justified, or how would you say? Because it's really a sensitive subject to talk about, because at the same time, you don't want to see all this violence going on in the streets. You say to yourselves, at what point is this not the only fallback, right? At what point do we not resort to looting stores or banging on cop cars? So what are your thoughts on the way that protests have escalated? And do you think that it's the only way?
I mean, I would say it's not the only way, but, I think the conversation needs to be split into two different ways. When you talk about stores that are just local neighborhood stores that are getting destroyed, I'm going to ask the question about whether or not that's really helping, get any sort of notoriety and attention. And, as much as I come from a law enforcement family, when you have some of the police cars being damaged and stuff like that, that at least I don't agree with it, but there's at least a connection. There's at least a logical understanding of what is happening in the thought process of the individuals who are doing it. And, the whole point of this is that, a protest is a disruption in daily life if it's to be successful. And the whole point is, if you're going to disrupt, then you get people's attention. And when you get people's attention, we hope that the message is clear. And what I've always personally hoped in any of these situations is, my gut reactions is usually, oh no, I don't want to watch. I can't believe this is happening again. And I would love to just not watch, but I always do. And I always hope it's a cut and dry situation. Enough with the back and forth. There shouldn't be two sides to the story. It should just be wait, listen, learn, and then we can all begin to move forward. And it's never like that. And I think that's where these violent protests have kind of come out of that. Everybody's reacting, and it's full of emotion and rage for people who are a minority. It's years of living that are dealing with that emotion and that rage and that frustration. And for people who are not, you don't have the ability to come in and, just automatically say, can't be. How do they dare feel that way? They're selfish.
Coach Blount, I want to bounce that question back to you. Mr. Turk said it. It's not necessarily the way we want to see things pan out, but there are obviously hundreds and hundreds of years of pent-up anger at the injustice going on in our country. So, Coach Blount, I want to ask the same question to you. Do you think that the violent stages of protest are justified? Do you think that there are other better ways, and how have you seen those ways pan out? Muted, Mike.
Yep. Obviously taking a look at it, you never want to support violence. You never want to support looting and rioting and those types of things. I think that the thing that's difficult here is that you have a group of individuals who have been asking to be listened to for over hundreds of years. And even if we bring it back within the past, 80, 100 years, you could say peaceful protest with Dr. Martin Luther King, where he did a good job at promoting that concept of justice and freedom and equality. And at the end of the day, he ended up becoming assassinated. If you fast forward to 2016, when you sit there and you have Colin Kaepernick, who's sitting there and taking a knee to speak against the injustice given towards African Americans, he was shunned and thrown out the league. And he was also, the narrative was turned into now it's, he is disrespecting or African Americans or whoever partook in that protest are now disrespecting the flag or the military or whatever else it may be. So that message was misconstrued again, where he clearly stated what his reasoning was for that. And now we fast forward to 2020, where we sit there and we still have the same type of instances where individuals are fighting for equality and equal and justice, and they're still not being heard. So at some point, you also have to see it from the other side, is that you have individuals who have went the peaceful protest way for a long amount of time. And eventually you can only do certain things so long until you sit there and say, all right, we have to try something else. Now, by no means am I condoning the violence and looting, and something that we may also want to put part to that is that it's not all African Americans or people who are
absolutely not
stating that are doing this rioting and looting. We've already got to the fact that there are certain things in certain cities that just don't make sense. Whereas you can say there's bricks placed in certain places, or there's people that are egging on individuals to do certain things. When you also see videos, whether it's white, Latino, Asian Americans, whoever it may be, male, female, who are also partaking in some of this looting, and it really has nothing to do with the actual protest. I think when we talk about the concept of what's going on here, I think we have to unpack two things. You have to unpack the protesters from the rioters and the looters. I think you also have to unpack the good police from the bad police. And for me, I have family members and I have friends who are in the police departments, college teammates, and ex students, kids who are on my team. And I support the police 125%. We do have to realize that there are some bad police officers that give everyone a bad line, a bad name. Just as there's some bad teachers, there's bad businessmen, there's bad politicians. That just is what it is. But we have to be able to unpack the good from bad and really get back to the actual message of what's trying to be displayed here. And I get it. I get it where people would be upset about the first thing that we see is the rioting and the looting. All right, but if we can remove that aspect and sit there and what is the real reason why individuals are protesting? I think that's really more that's the big message there. And do we have to take care of the rioting and looting? Absolutely. But one thing I guess you can say to it, this for the first time really has got to the violent stage nationally with the rioting and looting. And for the first time, you're seeing all 50 states are actually having protests, or have been having protests in the last 2 weeks. 10 to 15 plus countries around the world, New Zealand, Paris, different places are having these protests as well. So this is really a bigger issue. And this is it's a local issue, it's a national issue, it's a global issue, and I think it's really starting to get some legway here.
And that's going to be one of our biggest setbacks, I think, in this instance. Is biased media. We need to have unbiased media in this time, because we want to be able to pass along the right message. Mr. Howley, how do you think the media has handled everything that's been going on in the last couple of weeks?
I think the media has done what it has tended to do in recent years, which is, some of them try and look fair, but they have their slant and their angle. Others don't even care about looking a certain way. They have their talking points, and they're hitting those talking points in order to fuel the people that come to watch them. And so they just give them what they want. This way they'll continue to watch, and then people can say, no, I saw this over here, and that's the way it is. You have to, as consumers of media, we have to be better at understanding where our information is coming from, and you have to make those decisions, conscious decisions, and where do you go to find this information out. And so I try to stay with things that are not supported by advertisers for myself. which helps to kind of minimize the messaging of what's happening there. But there's certain things, and that's the great thing about this time that we live in, is that with everybody having a camera on them, we can choose how to get that information, right? Through Twitter is where I've gotten a lot of my news about this, because you see people retweeting and cycling through things. And so there's the violence that you see, that it's not made up, because it's the violence that you see, right? And so, and if it's happening from a person who's a protester, who's on the front line, and they're sharing that, this is what happened to my friend who I was next to, and it didn't happen to me because I was white, it happens to them because they're black. Well, like, at a certain point, you can't argue these things because they're happening here and you can see them in full view. So that's really what's important. Like, and protests by their nature are supposed to disrupt society. Otherwise, you don't take notice. If people, like, if it's a protest and nobody notices it, well, then do what it was supposed to do. You got to protest.
Absolutely.
And I'm on here with a bunch of my colleagues who are all history teachers, and they know, like, Martin Luther King Jr., his letter from a Birmingham jail, I actually taught that in the class that you were in with me, Stephen. And he writes that he was in prison for that. So everybody always wants to say, well, he was nonviolent. No, but civil disobedience is what he preached. You can't be civilly disobedient without being disobedient. You are not listening, right? Because you had to disrupt it. You had to make some noise. You had to be loud, and you had to make a point. And that, causes the disruption to society. So society has to take notice, because if they didn't boycott the bus system, if they didn't march through and cause this uproar, then we wouldn't have had the change that we had. And I just found this out yesterday or today. The Montgomery bus boycott lasted over a year before it actually got accomplished. What is so? How long is it going to last? People, I hear that, and it's frustrating. How long these protests? How long are these people going to keep shouting? It's like, also you hear the codes in it, these people and everything like that. How long they're going to keep shouting until they're heard, because they're obviously not being heard. Like Colin Kaepernick kneeled. He tried to say something with actions that wasn't, doing anything wrong, but people wanted to attack him and change the topic, change the narrative. And when you control media and you can control the talking points, you can control that narrative and spin it. You have to keep doing what you're doing if you want to be heard. So the fact that boycott went for over a year, and it wasn't even stopped by the bus, it was stopped by a court order. Like, we have to do things, and it has to be messy, and democracy's always been messy. That's always been a tenet of it. And so, and then the media, then the frustrating thing for me is that the media is going to show us the violence, right? They're going to show us the violent protests. How many protests are there that are not violent? Right? There's a bunch of protests out there that are not violent, but they're not going to show those because that's not newsworthy anymore. If the entire country is protesting, nobody wants to see the protest. Yeah, well, they protest over here, and it was really nice and it was effective. No, they're going to show where stuff went down, and then you have to, when you look at the stuff where the stuff went down, then you have to look at, well, what's happening there? When the police are coming in, are they de-escalating? Or are they escalating the conflict? If there's a confrontation, like if there's people marching and they're not doing anything wrong yet, and then you show up with riot gear, what's the message you're sending? And you show up because if they're just marching and then you show up and you come up with the weapons, well, what message are you sending about how you're feeling that? Now, if you're trying to no, we're going to diffuse and we're going to give you space to do what you're going to do, but we're here to protect and serve, which is what it usually is. Well, then we're going to protect and serve. But who are you protecting and serving? And who are you protecting and serving when you were marching on people? I think a lot of that sends the message about what's happening here and what's going on. And there's so much to talk about this, because there's so many different spots of it. But also, it looks like our police, unfortunately, and not blaming them, it looks like they might not have been trained to handle this situation, and probably weren't, considering the average training for a police officer in the United States is about 21 weeks. All right. And 21 weeks of training might not prepare you for all the life situations you're going to encounter as a keeper of the peace. And I like that term more maybe than police officer. Germany, it's a 2 years of training. In Norway, it's 3 years of training. In Finland, it's a 3-year degree that goes along with it. And if you look at those countries, in Germany, that's the highest one, 267 deaths by police since 1990. And then in Finland, 7 people were killed by the police from 2000 to 2018. In the United States last year, in 2019, over 1,000 people were killed by police officers.
And those are countries that have been praised for their criminal justice systems, while the United States is still stuck back here. We're getting reprimanded for it. We're being told that things aren't the way they should be and that things need to change. Mr. Halley, I thought you brought to light a bunch of different points. More importantly, I think you brought to light the message that these officers showing up in riot gear passes along. And I think it passes along a message of disunity, because I think when you have these peaceful protesters coming to, spread their message and protest and press for change, and then these guys show up in riot gear, it's showing that you are so tone deaf to what we are actually asking for. You think that we're just going to go around and blow stuff up until we get what we want. No, we're trying to talk to you. We're trying to reason with you and level with you, and we want change peacefully. But you need to help us out. We need some help. We can't just keep doing the things that we've been doing, because that's not going to happen. And that leads into another excellent point that you brought up, which is there are a lot of people that are saying, well, this isn't the right way. We need to let things just take their course because time is going to change things. Well, how long are we going to continue to say that? How long are we going to keep saying that time is the only thing that's going to change us as a country? It's just not an excuse anymore. Mr. Manning, you unmuted your mic a little bit before.
Yeah, just to kind of reinforce what has already been said. You started your questions with asking about the rioters and the looters. It was Dr. King who said that riots are the voices of the unheard. And both Coach Blount and Mr. Howley said that, a lot of the root cause is not hearing the problems of communities and not hearing what's happening. And I believe it was also in Letters from a Birmingham Jail, Mr. Howley, where Dr. King said, before we criticize the rioters and the looters, which we should be ready to equally criticize the actions that led to that, right? And that's getting to the root cause of what we all saw, play out on television.
Like Frederick Douglass said before that, the only thing worse than rebellion is the thing that causes rebellion.
Right.
A bunch of you brought, or a couple of you, I wasn't counting, but a couple of you brought up the Colin Kaepernick kneeling situation. That's sort of been reopened with Drew Brees making a bunch of headlines in the news. And this is a deep question. I think it's one that might take a second to really sit on and think about. But the flag doesn't mean everything. It doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. People interpret it in different ways, and it means something different for everyone. So I'm going to go around. Mr. Manning, I'll start with you. What does the flag mean to you, and why does your interpretation of the flag why is that maybe not the same for other people?
Well, I'll start with first, when Drew Brees came out, the statement he released, I identified with greatly because my grandfather served in World War II, and I had a second grandfather who served during the Korean War. So yes, when I stand for the pledge, that's exactly what I think of, sacrifice that my grandfather made, and I stand in honor of the flag. But Drew Brees made the same mistake that I've made, maybe more in my younger days, where he's making the assumption that everybody should view the flag that way, and not, again, hearing how other people, see the flag. And I've come to kind of understanding, and I use this analogy in my class all the time, if you give me a second. My grandfather served in World War II. He came home and bought a house under the GI Bill. He then used that accumulated wealth in that house to give it to my father, right? It was passed to my father. And then my father started his family, and that accumulated wealth eventually made its way to me, right? When my grandfather bought that house under the GI Bill, that opportunity was not afforded to an African American.
No.
Who also served in World War II and fought to defend the freedoms of that flag. So for me to say to someone, hey, you should stand for the anthem because this is the way I look at the flag, is not listening to people who might view it differently. And I get aggravated when people say Colin Kaepernick disrespected the flag. No, Colin Kaepernick, when he first protested, he sat on the bench. He then had a conversation. Colin Kaepernick listened to Nate Boyer, his teammate, who asked him, and he said, they had a conversation, and Colin Kaepernick said, okay, what can I do to protest and respect the flag? And they came up with, well, why don't you take a knee? Because that's what we do when we lose someone in battle. We honor them by taking a knee, and we stand by the flag. And it was his teammate who first knelt with him. Somebody help me out. Who was his teammate from the 49ers, who the very first one to kneel with him?
Eric Reed.
Eric Reed, right? If you read his commentary in the Times that he released after, they said that it was very symbolic because it's like a flag at half mast when you take a knee.
Right.
You know, and so here's a guy who wants to be heard. He's trying to do it respectfully. And I think Coach Blount said it in the beginning, like people took over his narrative and made it about disrespecting the flag. It's not about disrespecting the flag. He asked to be heard. And I find it, because I remember the conversations in class, kids were coming in really fired up that he took a knee. And to see how time can be a great thickener of things. And now everybody's saying, look at those looters and rioters. Can't they just do it peacefully like Colin Kaepernick? You know, maybe we should have listened to him when he was peacefully protesting. So that's my reflection on that.
Right.
Also, like the other thing, like they took kneeling as to be an insult, but kneeling, when do you ever kneel as an insult? Places that you kneel, I remember kneeling when coach called me in, hey guys, gather around, take a knee. I listen to my coach. I kneel at church, and I kneel I'm trying to think of the other places where you kneel, like, and for a fallen soldier in the military. I didn't serve, so I don't know that, but what Nate Boyer said. So like it's a sign of respect, almost undoubtedly, right? But it's also,
I mean, it's definitely not. It's definitely a thought. There was definitely a thought process behind taking a knee. It wasn't like he woke up one morning and said, I'm going to take a knee because it seems like it's going to piss people off. No, he did something different at first, and then he changed it because he sat back and, like Mr. Manning said, he listened to someone who might have had a different perspective from him, and he changed his ways in a way that should be perceived as a balance between respect and protest and asking for change.
And time changes the way everybody perceives everything, because Cassius Clay was not perceived as a hero at the time, but Muhammad Ali is the greatest, right? And that's because of like the way that he went about sending his message. People, when he made his decisions, people weren't like, way to go. No, they were fired up and mad at him about that. And forgive me for not knowing the names, and I should because it's my sport, but the two American sprinters in the 72 Olympics in Mexico with the fist in the air.
You know, I just read those names too, and I can't remember.
But like at the time, outrage and people are fired up about it, and now like play the music and put the Civil Rights March in there and put in the commercial and sell your shoes or your Apple computers with that, because people do that because that's the sign of being strong and powerful. But at the time, that was traitorous and disrespectful. So it all, you know, time changes the way that we perceive those things, and that's what's happened. We're in the process of seeing that changing with Colin Kaepernick too.
And the sprinters were Tommy Smith and John Carlos during the '68 Olympics. So let's move on to a topic that is a little bit closer to home. We've had to deal with a situation regarding race in the last couple of months. You know, a racist situation going on in the school with one of the students. Coach Blount, I want to start with you here. How do you think that the district handled the video that was put out there, that was released on Twitter? How do you think they dealt with the backlash that the district got, you know, because it is one of their students? As a whole, how do you think Oceanside School District managed the situation?
I'm still waiting to make my final judgment on how the whole thing was handled, as we're still in school. I'm not really sure of what exactly any type of consequence was that may have been issued to any students that may have been involved. We're still looking for answers ourselves as a staff. I would just like to think that as a school district, as our job as educators is, one, to set the moral and ethical tone in our communities and in our school buildings. We are like the last, you know, we're the last stance when it comes to those things. You know, parents in this community and parents across the nation entrust educators with their children to teach them what's morally correct and what's you know, and equity and all those other good things, accountability. They trust us to do those things with their children for 8 hours a day, for 180 so days a year for 14, 15 years. Personally, I don't think, you know, when we sit there and look at where we have situations of whether it's videos or shirts or whatever else it may be, dealing with racial or words that are putting down individual groups of people, I think that we have a firm stance and be able to say that, no, that's not all right. These are things that we do not support, as educators or as administration or as a community as overall. And if we're unable to make those stances, essentially we're saying that it's okay. And at this point right now, I don't think that we've adequately addressed or handled those situations. I've made a statement on Twitter, pretty much saying that because my voice wasn't being heard for many years. And I 100% stand by that because that's how absolutely I feel. And once again, a couple of bad apples tend to end up giving a place a bad name. And unless you're willing to deal with and weed out those bad apples and then educate those bad apples to make individuals better again. All right. So we are entrusted and given the power to educate our youth, all right, and to make those changes, to make individuals aware, to allow them to listen, to allow them to be well-informed thinkers, all right, and be able to give back to their communities the proper things or the more moral and ethical things that are needed. When it comes to morality, there's no right or wrong. And I think that we have dropped the ball in that instance. And it's tough to hold other people accountable. And it's tough to set the values for other groups of people or younger classes if we consistently don't take a stance when it comes to these issues and address it for what it is. It is an uncomfortable situation. It is an uncomfortable conversation, but it's something that must be had. And for us as educators, that is our job, to have those difficult situations, those conversations, and make those difficult things, because that's our job. And at the end of the day, if we're not doing those things, we're not allowing people to grow, and we're not making people better, and we're just eventually being a part of that giant cycle that will continue to happen unless we are able to educate each other.
And what do you think some of the ways that we can do better are?
That's a real open question.
Yeah, no, of course, but I mean, they got to be answers.
We could do a lot. I mean, first, one of the things I've said is just listen to different perspectives. I've had the opportunity, whether through my social media following, a lot of the students follow me. My account is not a personal account, it's a public account. So I've been able to interact with a lot of students, although we haven't been in school, and speak to them, and they ask questions. Hey, what can we do? Or what's your thought? And I can't tell you how many students, whether it's alumni or whether it's current students, who may post things on their stories, and then I end up having a conversation with them, and they end up saying, hey, Coach or Mr. Blount, I never really saw it that way. I didn't think about it that way. And one of the things that we do in particular from the social studies department is we make such a focus from 9th grade and on, and I'm pretty sure they're doing it in the younger levels as well, is teaching individuals to, one, to claim and fact check things, right? But we also talk about the concept of having the ability to look at history or look at stances, or look at things from different lenses. All right. And we have to be able to see things from different lenses before we make any type of judgment or make any type of decision moving forward. I joke around with my criminology kids every single year, right? And we sit there and we speak about, if you knew that if you knew what the consequence was before you ended up making a mistake or ended up going against your parents, would you sit there and look for it from both perspectives? Right, and I question people, and I ask our students, look from it from both sides. And I know with Mr. Turk and Mr. Howley, and I was Mr. Manning as social studies and English teachers, we always try to look at things from different perspectives, because things are always coming from one way or the other. And until we're able to look at things from different perspectives, we're always going to align ourselves with like-minded people, and we're never going to end up being more educated and be a more holistic person.
And Mr. Blount, Mr. Blount, I have never called you Mr. Blount once. Whatever. Coach Blount, Mr. Blount, you said that you were going on Twitter, going public, talking about your feelings. And there are a lot of people in pop culture doing the same. I mean, there are musicians. We see it. People are very upset that politics and sports are mixing now. NASCAR, they just banned the Confederate flag from all of their locations. And this no-win NASCAR driver thought he's making some statement by retiring. Never heard of him. I don't know very many people that have heard of him. I don't think his stance is very impactful. But Mr. Turk, I want to direct this question to you. What do you think about that notion that we got to separate politics from sports, or separate politics from music and pop culture, and we need to let the news and the reporters do their thing, and then these entertainers by profession just need to entertain and need to keep their mouths shut?
Well, this is probably not going to be a popular answer, but I say it's bogus. When you have news broadcasters, we don't live in an era where our news broadcasters were our rocks. We don't all gather around the television set like it once was and listen to these people who never tried to lean you one way or the other. Those days are gone in this country and maybe arguably around the world. So I think when you got somebody like Drew Brees, right, making a statement like that, and then a couple of days later you have his teammates breaking down his phone or breaking down his door and saying, no, we need to have a conversation. They could have easily kept their mouth closed and then let the season started and then let him get some knocks. And that's it. It could have just
out there without an offensive line.
Yeah, and it didn't go that way. And that was the best part about that whole thing. He's expressing his viewpoint, and then he comes around and he changes his mind because he actually kept quiet and listened. And that's the best example. Like on a team, when you talk about coaching kids now, I'm going to go out to a field and I'm going to want to ask them those same questions. I'm going to want to ask them how they managed COVID, let alone talking about some of these, riots and some of these different situations and all of the racial tensions and everything else. So when you get celebrities coming in and making their piece, my hope is that they've listened and they've learned before they use their platform. Don't come out. Go ahead, Steve.
Right. Well, no, and it's really ironic because the people, Laura Ingraham, right? She went on TV, Shut Up and Dribble a couple of years ago when it was Kevin Durant and LeBron James talking about politics. But when Drew Brees says something that fits in line with her ideology, with her political blueprint, it's, he's human, right? He's allowed to have his own opinion. He's allowed to say what he wants because he's a human just like the rest of us. He's just an entertainer by profession. So it's pretty ironic to see how these people flip their stances when it fits their agenda, right?
But Stephen, you read between the lines too, because like Drew Brees, like he's a human, he's got a personality, he's got a belief system and this that. Kevin Durant and LeBron James should shut up and dribble because they're entertainers. One's a human, one's here for my consumption. And it's not said, but it's said every day, and it's not spoken, but it's spoken. If you're listening, you hear it all the time with that.
And what I can't stand is when like Kevin Durant hasn't been Kevin Durant his entire life. Like you're telling me that he didn't live the life of somebody who is black and grow up that
before
way?
He went to Texas, way before he went to Texas when he was living in Maryland, right?
Right. I know the whole country loved LeBron James, from 8th grade on, but what about kindergarten through 7th grade?
You don't know what he went through then. You don't know what he went through. You don't know what shaped his mindset.
Yeah, his parents had to have conversations with him about what it's like to live and grow up as a black man.
And that's also why you have these problems with Dabo Swinney, who are totally tone deaf to the everyday experiences of the players in his locker room. They're really concerned with cashing their $10 million a year, their $10 million salary, but they're not concerned with gaining perspective, with sitting down and having these difficult conversations with their black players and understanding what they go through in their daily lives. Because like I said, I've never lived a day of my life as a black man. I don't understand those experiences, but I know that they're different from mine. I know that I cannot sympathize. I can only empathize with, certain life experiences.
I think that's, I'm sorry, Steve.
No.
I think that's really the big thing that we're kind of getting away from in an aspect of education. If you are coaching someone, you are instructing someone, you are teaching someone, your job first before anything else is teaching them how to become a better man, a better woman. All right, teaching them all those life lessons that should be given on top of the lessons that are already given to them at home. And for some of them in our society today, they're not getting those lessons at home. So sometimes those are the first lessons they're getting from their instructor, from their teacher, from their coach, whatever else it may be. If we as a profession of people who are instructing youth are getting away from what's important first, the most important, the values of being a human being and how to be better and become a good man and woman, everything else doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many 3-step drops I could teach, how many corner kicks, or what the great start is, or how to field a double play. All of that's irrelevant if that kid or that young man or young woman is a bad person overall and doesn't understand those key concepts of accountability, trust, loyalty, respect, dignity, morality. That is what's important. And we've gotten away from it in education and different areas where we get caught up with pedagogy and content and technology, everything else. We forget that education, and education ties in when you're doing with sports or music or anything else, is about relationships. You have to be able to build relationships and teach individuals what's right and what's wrong. The relationships are the most important thing. Everything else will end up taking its role, because no one's gonna. I say to my kids all the time, no one's gonna really matter. No one's gonna care about the Pythagorean theorem, right, when they're 45 years old. But if they're a moral person and a just person, that's gonna be just as important. And it could be anything from a science equation to a historical, memorizing the Bill of Rights. It doesn't matter what it is or what field it is. But we have to teach people the right thing and how to be good men and women. That's the only thing that's important. Everything else, great. All right, I get it. I get there's tests. I get all the other stuff. But they have to leave our hands. You in particular, you're leaving us in 5 days or whatever it may be. Granted, your graduation is not until July. All right, but you're leaving us soon. All right. And I know, at least from my communication with you, that you're leaving as a better person than when I first met you. And that's our goal. That should be our goal as educators. Right. That should be our motto as educators.
And it's great that there are people out there like, say, a Greg Popovich or a Steve, or even Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's has been all over their Twitter, posting and bringing awareness to what's going on. It's such a good thing that we have these people in spotlight positions that are willing to have these uncomfortable talks, because without them, who knows how far back we would be.
Hey, I just want to jump in now because Coach Blount brought something up, which I thought was really wonderful. He's talking about, Stephen, how you entered the high school to how you're leaving the high school. And Stephen, this is the first anybody's going to hear about this in public, but every year when we hand out the yearbooks in the auditorium, which we lost that opportunity, we give out an award to somebody who is willing to help and build the community of Oceanside High School. And this year's Sailor of the Year is Mr. Stephen Sklar. So I want to give you a compliment and shout out because you're not afraid to have the conversations. You're not afraid to build, community and spirit in here that's positive and working. So compliments to you, Stephen.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Was that breaking news on the Stephen Sklar show?
That is breaking news.
That is breaking news.
I'm happy to be a part of that.
Right there. And listen, there could be one person, 2 people, 3 people that listen to this. There could be 100, 200, 300, 400, 10,000. It doesn't matter, because if even just one person could watch this and learn something from this, I think that I've done what I set out to do. I think that it's a job well done, because it's step by step and the small victories matter. And we're only going to get to a better spot if we, pile up these small victories into a battle won or a war won. I do want to talk, I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but I do want to talk about what you guys were talking about before with instructing the next generation. A couple of you guys you know what? This is going to sound like I didn't do my homework, but do all of you guys have kids? Yes? No, Mr. Manning?
No, not for me yet, but I've offered my help to Blount to babysit on several occasions. He never takes me up on the offer.
He never takes your why? Okay, that's a different Google Meet. We'll talk about that on a different Google Meet. But how have you guys handled this with your kids? I'll start with Mr. Howley. How have you addressed what's going on in the news with your kids? They're old enough to understand. They're old enough to watch the news. So, yeah, floor is yours.
It's you see, so something we didn't even get into as much now is like, sort of the white privilege conversation versus, Black Lives Matter and everything that goes on. And part of what I understand with my privilege is that I can, in some ways, choose when I want to have this conversation, as opposed to Mr. Blount cannot choose. So it's just it's a daily fact of life. So I'm trying to be as good as I can in doing it the right way, whatever way that is. But there's my kids. We've had this conversation before, not exactly to this extent, but I've introduced Jackson loves baseball. there's a great series of books like Meet So and So historical figures. Jackie Robinson was
Yeah,
in there.
yes. Mickey and Me, the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's and then there's a bunch of people from history, Amelia Earhart, but there's Frederick Douglass, I think, is in there, Abraham Lincoln. So like I've tried to introduce it that way, so it's not just like, okay, here now today's the day we're gonna have this talk. Like it's been there, and with him, I really the movie 42, is something we watched together, so we're able to talk about that. And because he's asked me questions when we're watching, about the nature of like what he sees. And the thing is that the kids are they hear so much more than you think they do, because my youngest son, Owen, who just turned 6, asked me just yesterday, like, why don't Black people and white people like each other? And so I had to like address that conversation, and that was and obviously he's hearing things, so I had to talk to him about it and say, I'm like, well, that's not the way that it really works. And I tried to explain, what's going on with the protest, because my daughter came home and she said, like, oh, there's a protest in West Islip. And like, I was happy there was a protest in West Islip, because like, how often do things come here? And there was people there on the streets. There were spray painted Black Lives Matter and Check Your Privilege. I saw them when I went out for a run in the morning. And I was happy to see it, because I kind of, nodded my head and like smiled like that it was there. And then this, demonstration happened. I rode my bike up there and I checked it out. It was a good protest, I thought, from what I saw. And so I wanted to, bring that experience to my kids. And my wife was concerned that I'm putting the kids in danger if I bring them to a protest. And, so we got into a discussion. So it's not always easy, because sometimes like trying to figure out like at what level do you show them what's there. So it's as it shows up. But I try to explain to my children, and with Owen, he said something about, I said, some people are going to treat you better because of the way you look versus how other people are treated. And he said to me, like, even Black babies? I was like, yeah, even Black babies. Like, that's not fair. I'm like, no. It's like, and then he said, I'm sorry for our dog, Shay. I'm like, oh, why are you sorry for her? Like, well, she's Black. And then it was like this moment where you love talking to kids, because I'm like, Owen, I'm like, this is gonna sound weird, but nobody cares that Shay is Black. And she's a dog, and nobody cares. But like, it's a person, and then things change. And so you have like, and such a like a little light bulb moment for me to like talk to him and have that moment. And I love that, like being able to have that moment with him. But he started that conversation with I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but a lot of the streaming services are offering The Hate U Give is now streaming for free. I'm going to watch that I was thinking about giving that book to my daughter soon, but I'm going to watch that with the kids, I think. So that's another way that I'm going to bring that into the conversation. The other day just yesterday, we were watching Black Panther, and Owen said he wants to be the Black Panther. And I'm like, yeah, so do I. But like all of that just brings in a little bit, like seeing faces that aren't always their face, and just like letting them, come into contact as often as you can, things like that, and try and bring that in, and not to shy away from the conversations, not to shut it down. A lot of times I think that's a response. Like if people don't want to talk about that, you try and meet them where they are, and let them surprise you, and let them grow with it, because it's not an easy conversation, but have the difficult conversations. Don't run away from them is the best thing that I try to do.
Right. And Coach Blount, I also want to hear your perspective. I want to know how you've been dealing with this with your kids. You have a bunch of them. Not all of them are necessarily old enough to understand what's going on in the news, but for the ones that are, how have you talked about this situation with them?
Well, I have a 7.5, a 6, a 4, and a 2.5-year-old. So the 4 and 2.5-year-old, they're obviously still clueless.
Right.
Like, just excited when the sun comes up. But for the other two, to tell you the truth, I've kind of kept them away. All right, I kept them away, out of these conversations for now. I remember having those conversations, obviously with my father at 12, 13 years old, and it's a different conversation that individual will have. I'll have to have those conversations with them soon. It's obviously a conversation I don't want to rush into, but I've tried to keep them away from the news, and I think one of the big things that we have to do better as parents, and all these guys can attest to this, as old as some of the older generation is, there's time for family talk, and there's time for adult talk. And I think some of the problems that we have here today is that we have adult talk with children. adult talk around children. And there's certain things that shouldn't be shared with them because we're not allowing them to formulate their own viewpoints. And in a way, I feel like we're kind of driving our own viewpoints into our children, which is a part of the problem that we have with our society today. And so I'm taking an approach of kind of like laissez-faire with that in that aspect. In 2 years, 3 years, you know, my big guy gets to 10, 11 years old. You know, I'll have to have those conversations and speaking about how to handle situations, what to do, you know, in all types of situations in life, which is something that, you know, Pat or Jay and Mike aren't going to necessarily have to have with their children. So that's realistic. That's real life, you know. So when I think about all these things that go on, and whether it's local, whether it's national, first thing I think about is my children. And, you know, how can I end up, you know, being a good father and, you know, and trying to make sure that they are aware so they can be the best people that they can possibly be moving forward. And it's difficult, you know, and, you know, even when we're in a car, I hear things and, you know, my 6-year-old just started to repeat something about the 75-year-old guy that got pushed down. And he got up. I said, I go, where'd you hear that from? He goes, I just heard it from the radio. And from that, I was like, all right, let me change the station, you know. But I think that's important for us to understand. And I guess the big message I guess I would have for our listeners are, you know, as adults, let's have adult conversations with the adults. Let's not have those conversations at the dinner table. Let them formulate their own ideas, you know, whether it's racial stuff, political stuff, so on and so forth. And then when they get to that age, you can start entertaining those conversations. I think it'll make us better people as a whole, you know, moving forward.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Alley.
Well, I said, no, it's true because like I was kind of jumping the gun with like wanting to bring the kids down there. My wife's like, no, slow down. And he's like, yeah, let the kids be kids. But Owen brought that conversation to me. And so I had that conversation with him and like, let them dictate a little bit. Like, cause when the kids are curious, they're going to ask you things and they're going to want to know. But as long as we do a good job of showing them as much as we can about the good things that are in the world and what there is to be excited and happy about, I think that's, you know, the best we can do. You know, they don't give you a playbook on how to parent. It's kind of a figure it out as you're going along type of thing. So, you know, we do the best we can.
Absolutely. And, you know, you just hope that by the time your kids are, you know, 20, 25, 30, that the conversations that you have to have with them aren't as severe. You hope that things are going to get better. I know we're all hoping that things are going to get better. And I think that stuff like this is one of those small victories. This is one of those first steps towards making the world a better place. If we can, you know, get groups together, we can talk about this openly, have the uncomfortable conversations. And, you know, you just hope people that you just hope that people are willing to tune in and listen to those uncomfortable conversations. So thank you guys for coming together today, for talking about this with me. It's not an easy conversation to have, but it's an important conversation to have. So again, thank you guys so much.
Steve, always appreciate you, and congratulations on your award.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you everybody else. It was a good conversation to have today. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, guys. See ya.
All right, take care, guys.
Bye.